Welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. Okay, I made a mistake in today's episode, and instead of re-recording the whole episode, I'm just giving you this preamble here. I said that Ezra was a contemporary of Haggai and Zechariah. I misspoke. He was not. Ezra is kind of a historian, and so the first 4 to 6 chapters of Ezra is him recapping what happens before he gets there in chapter 7. And I know better. I knew better. I just misspoke. I also call Ezra Ezekiel once in this episode. And so just flub that up. Anyway, enjoy the episode and recognize that I still mess up sometimes. Have a good day. Today we are in the book of Ezra. We'll be in the book of Ezra for a couple of days, but let's dive into Ezra chapter 1 and talk about the rebuilding. Now, Ezra is taking place considerably after the 70 years of exile. So this is some years after that. So you'll remember after the 70 years were completed, the people went back, they started to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, kind of started to reestablish it, and Ezra comes in after that. It says this: "In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made proclamation throughout the kingdom and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah." Now, so the book of Ezra, I shouldn't have said that the whole book of Ezra occurs like years after the 70 years. Ezra is a long book, so it's only a few chapters, but it covers a long span of time. And so I'll try to point that out as we're kind of going through this. And I'll have a little bit more information about that in the blog as well. But we've already seen Cyrus the king, and we saw him prophesied about in Isaiah 44 and Isaiah 45, where God said that he was going to raise up Cyrus the king, his servant, and that he was going to restore Jerusalem. Now that's in Isaiah. That was 200 years before this takes place, roughly. And then we've also seen this a little bit at the very end of 2 Chronicles 36, and it corresponds to the exact beginning of Ezra 1. So if you're reading the Bible straight through from how it's put in our scriptures, Genesis to Revelation, you will have just ended with the end of 2 Chronicles 36. You'll have just heard these few verses here, and then we're going to read them again in Ezra. So Cyrus now is building a house for the Lord, and he has been commissioned by God to build this house for the Lord. And then so Cyrus says this, verse 3, "Whoever is among you of the people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, to rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Let each survivor in whatever place he sojourns be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold and goods and beasts, besides freewill offerings for the house of God that's in Jerusalem." And then rose up the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred to go up to rebuild the house of the Lord that's in Jerusalem. And all who were about them aided them with vessels of silver and gold and goods and beasts, along with costly wares, besides all that was freely offered. Cyrus the king also brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. Cyrus the king of Persia brought these out in charge of Mithridath, the treasurer, who counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this was the number of the basins of gold, 1,000, basins of silver, this was the number of them, basins of gold, 1,000 basins of silver, 29 censers, 30 bowls of gold, 410 bowls of silver, and 1,000 other vessels. So this is an interesting little side note in the book of Ezra. So King Cyrus is having the temple of the Lord rebuilt, and he goes into the treasury of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, who's long since dead, and he pulls out all the things that were originally stolen from the temple of the Lord, and he goes, "Here, take these back." And in Ezra 8, so this is Ezra 1 that we're in right now, and in Ezra 8, Ezra is entrusted with these things to bring them back to the temple, and they make this like 3 to 5 month journey. I forget exactly how long, I'll tell you tomorrow. They make this 3 to 5 month journey back to Jerusalem, and when they get back, they count all the stuff to make sure it's still there. In other words, here, the king Cyrus goes, "Here's all this stuff that belongs in the temple of the Lord, take it back with you." They take it back with them, and then when they get back, Ezra counts to just kind of make sure it's all there, that none of it got lost along the way, right? It didn't get stolen along the way. So I'm skipping chapter 2. You can go read Ezra chapter 2 if you want. It's genealogies. It's counting the people. And that's just a lot for me to read through with you. So Ezra chapter 3, "When the 7th month came and the children of Israel were in the towns, the people gathered as one man to Jerusalem. Then arose Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, with his fellow priest, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his kinsmen, and they built the altar of God to Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. They set the altar in its place, for fear was on them because of the peoples of the land, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, burnt offerings morning and evening. And then they kept the feast of booths, as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number according to the rule each day. And after that, the regular burnt offerings, the offerings at the new moon, and all the appointed feasts of the Lord. So come back up with me. This is the 7th month. When the 7th month comes, they keep the Feast of Booths. There were 3 celebrations in the 7th month, very important ones. The most important one probably being the Day of Atonement. So they get back together, and there's no temple yet, but they build the altar of the Lord, and they are beginning to celebrate these feasts, these 3 feasts that we saw in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. They're celebrating, or not in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They're celebrating these feasts that take place in the 7th month of the year. Sorry. So from the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings, but the foundation of the temple was not yet laid. Now, in the 2nd year, after they're coming to the house of Jerusalem, in the 2nd month, so in the 1st year, in the 7th, look, it kind of feels like this is 2 years later. It's not 2 years later. In the previous verses that we just read, they're observing all the months, all the feast in the 7th month of year 1. And then you fast forward to the 2nd month of the next year, and what you have is you're talking about 7 months later. All right. So when it says in the 2nd year, in the 2nd month, this is 7 months later from the part we just read. And it says this: in the 2nd month, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, also called Joshua in a couple of places, the son of Josadak, made a beginning together with the rest of their kinsmen, the priests and the Levites, and all who had come from Jerusalem from captivity. They appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to supervise the work of the house of the Lord. And so they lay the foundation. Look at verse 10. When the builders had laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments came forward with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, remember Asaph from the Psalms? He wrote some of the Psalms for us, came with cymbals to praise the Lord according to the directions of David the king. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord. And this is what they sang: for he is good, and his steadfast love endures forever towards Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout, and they praised the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord had been laid. But many of the priests and the Levites, the heads of the father's household, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid, though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of joyful shoutings from the sound of people weeping, for the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away. So you have these young people who are seeing the foundation of the house of the Lord laid, and they're celebrating and they're rejoicing and they're crying out in praise. And then you have the old people, these old stately people who had been taken into captivity in Babylon and now brought back. And remember, they were taken into Babylon before the temple was destroyed. And so they come back and they're rebuilding it, and they're weeping over, and some people argue like for joy, maybe. In Haggai 2:3, it gives us a little bit more insight into this. And it says, look at this foundation, look at this temple now. Is it anything like the temple that was made before? It's not. And so the implication, at least, is that the people who are weeping that they're having to start all over, and they're weeping that the temple is not as, the foundation isn't even as rich and beautiful as the original one had been. So there are people celebrating, there are people weeping. Jump to chapter 4. Now, when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building the temple, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do, and we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, the king of Assyria, who brought us here." Now, you might not know this connection. This connection takes us all the way back to 2 Kings 17, 29 through 33. And this is where the northern kingdom of Israel fell to the Assyrian power, and they were removed, the people of Israel were removed from their nation, and the Assyrians began to dwell in the cities. And you might remember from 2 Kings 17 that God sent lions among the Assyrians to begin to eat them. And the Assyrians sent back and said, "Hey, send some of those Jews back here, send some of those Hebrew people back here. We don't know how to honor the God of this land, and he's killing us with lions." So some of the Hebrews, remember, the northern kingdom of Israel was an idolatrous group of people. They had never served the Lord faithfully. And they come back and they go, "Oh, here's how you're supposed to serve Yahweh." And so what happened is you had the Assyrian people intermarrying with the Jews that they had brought back. And they said, "Let's worship the gods of the Assyrians and also worship the gods of the Jews, Yahweh God, and let's intermingle these gods." And so these are the Samaritans. These are the people that in the New Testament we call the Samaritans. That's why the Jews didn't like them. They had been intermingled with other nations. They had served other gods. And so these people, and I need you to catch this. Look at verse 1. These are adversaries of Judah and Benjamin. And they're like, hey, let us help you build the temple. We've been serving your God since we moved to this land. And that's only half true. Yahweh God was one of many of the gods they were serving. He was just another deity to them. They weren't really serving him faithfully. So Zerubbabel and Jeshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses said, you have nothing to do with us in building the house of our God, but we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded. This sentiment right here, you have nothing to do with us, carries over. This is 400 years roughly before the New Testament where we pick up. And this carries over for 400 years to why the modern day Jews in Jesus' day hated the Samaritans. They basically said, you have no part with us. Of course, we know that Jesus redeems everybody. So it says, then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build. They bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia, and in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants. So they basically stop the people from building. The foundation gets laid, and then nothing's going to happen for a very, very long time. Okay, and I'm gonna jump down here to verse 5 or chapter 5, just the beginning, and it says this. Now the prophets. So this is Ezra. This is when the rebuilding begins. So Ezra chapter 4. It's been a while since I've mapped out the timeline, but Ezra chapter 4 covers a long time. It covers a lot of different kings. It covers a few decades. And so when Ezra chapter 5 begins, it's them kind of coming back in and rebuilding this. Ezra 4 is longer than you think it is. It's not only longer than you think it is, but Ezra even speaks to stuff in Ezra 4 that's going to happen later. So Ezra 4 covers not just what's going on in the book of Ezra, but even what surpasses the book of Ezra. It's just kind of this out-of-place summary of all of the events. So Ezra 5, it's been a long time. They're now about to rebuild it's been a while. They're now about to go back to rebuilding. And it says, now the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, two prophets that we have in our Bible, contemporaries of Ezra, the sons of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God of Israel who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, arose and began to rebuild the house of God that's in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. At the same time, Tatanai, keep that guy's name in mind, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Shethar-Bozenai and their associates came to them and spoke to them, who gave you the decree to build this house and to finish it with this structure? And they also asked them, what are the names of the men who are building this building with you? But the eye of their God was upon the elders and the Jews, and they didn't stop them until the report should reach Darius, and then an answer be returned by letter. So the foundation is laid. The people, the opposers, the people in opposition to Judah and Benjamin, stop them from building. They write a letter to the king, and they say, hey, make these people stop building. And the king at that time makes the people stop building. Cyrus is dead. And so now they're waiting to hear back from King Darius as to whether or not these people should be building or not. And so I'll try to tie all these pieces together. It's kind of a hodgepodge mess between these different prophets, but I'll try to tie these together. And instead of continuing with Ezra tomorrow, we're going to jump over to Haggai, the prophet, to look at him for a little bit. So go ahead and read that ahead of time. It's a very short book, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible through another section of Scripture where we come to know and understand God a little bit better. Look, if you're brand new to Simpler Bible, we have all sorts of resources available for you. Go to our website, simplerbible.com, and there you can find these videos, you can find our podcast, you can find links to our social media, and you can even find a blog post with additional scriptures if you want to go into a little bit more study than we had time to cover in this podcast and video today. We hope that this tool will be exactly that for you, a tool. Not something that replaces your daily walk with God, but something that enhances your daily walk with God and helps you to know and enjoy Him more. Thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll see you again tomorrow.